Welcome to Dreamscribe, your companion on the journey to peaceful sleep. Before you drift off, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps this calming community grow. Where in the world are you tuning in from? I bought the RV on impulse. It wasn't like me to do something so reckless, but I needed to escape. Life had become a suffocating cycle of dead-end routines, missed opportunities, and sleepless nights. The thought of breaking free, driving wherever I wanted, waking up in different places, chasing sunsets instead of deadlines, felt like salvation. The RV wasn't perfect. It was old, a little battered, and had a strange, musty smell I couldn't quite place. The guy who sold it to me, a wiry man with deep-set eyes, barely spoke. He just handed over the keys, took my money, and left with a hurried glance over his shoulder. Maybe I should have seen that as a warning. The first night on the road was uneventful. Peaceful even. I parked at a roadside rest stop, the kind with faded picnic tables and vending machines stocked with stale snacks. The highway stretched out in both directions, disappearing into the darkness. I locked the doors, curled up in the small bed, and listened to the wind against the RV's metal frame. Then I heard it. It was subtle at first, an odd repetition of sound. The soft creak of the mattress, as I shifted, echoed back at me a moment later. The sigh I let out came back, slightly delayed. I sat up. The RV was empty. The doors were locked. There was no one else inside. I chalked it up to acoustics, maybe the way the RV's interior reflected sound. I tested it, clapping my hands once. The clap returned, slightly distorted. I laughed, shaking my head. I was just tired. My mind was playing tricks on me. Still, the air inside the RV felt different. Charged. Expectant. Ignoring the nagging unease in my gut, I lay back down and forced myself to sleep. The first conversation. The next morning, I woke up to golden sunlight filtering through the dusty curtains. The previous night felt distant, almost like a dream. I got up, made some coffee, and started driving again. The hum of the engine and the open road felt liberating. By noon, I pulled into a deserted parking lot near a wooded area. It was quiet, almost too quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves. Just silence. That's when I decided to test the echo again. I cleared my throat. Hello. A few seconds later, my own voice returned, slightly off. Hello. A strange sensation crawled down my spine. I tried again. Testing 1, 2, 3. A beat. Then, testing 1, 2, 3. The last word stretched unnaturally, as if something had interfered. I laughed, shaking my head. Weird. This time, the echo came back immediately. Weird. But the voice wasn't mine. The unease creeps in. I froze. The word, spoken in the same tone, the same inflection, felt foreign. I told myself it was just a glitch, some bizarre sound phenomenon inside the RV. Still, a cold weight settled in my chest. I tried again. Is anyone here? The response came a few seconds later. Is anyone here? Identical to my voice. I let out a shaky breath. Okay, that's enough. This time, there was no echo. The silence stretched, heavy and unnatural. Then a soft whisper. That's enough. Doubt and denial. I nearly knocked over my coffee in my rush to grab my phone. I opened the recording app, hit record, and spoke again. Hello? Nothing. I replayed the clip, just my own voice, no echo, no distortion. I felt ridiculous. I was psyching myself out over a sound delay. There had to be an explanation. Maybe something about the materials of the RV was causing the sound to bounce. Maybe the insulation was off. I took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. There's no one else here. I shook off the unease and forced myself to go about my day. By evening, I had almost convinced myself I imagined it. Then night fell, and the echoes returned. The voices in the dark. It started as I was brushing my teeth. The soft sounds of water running and the toothbrush scraping against my teeth seemed to linger, as if the walls were holding on to the noise and releasing it moments later. I turned off the faucet. Drip. The sound repeated itself, but this time, the drip came from behind me. I spun around. The small bathroom was empty. Then, a soft sigh. Not mine. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My pulse thundered in my ears. I forced a laugh, shaking my head. This is so stupid. The echo came back immediately. This is so stupid. But the voice, it was deeper. Hoarser. Not mine. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and started recording again. Say something, I whispered, staring at my reflection. Silence. I stopped the recording and played it back. My own breathing filled the speakers. Then, a quiet chuckle. I dropped the phone. The unseen presence. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I made the slightest noise, the echo returned, but always wrong. By 3 a.m., I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my keys and stumbled outside, desperate for fresh air. The cold night pressed against my skin, grounding me. The RV sat there, dark and motionless, but it felt awake. Watching. I turned to look at the woods stretching beyond the parking lot. Moonlight cast long shadows between the trees. Then, a whisper. So soft, I barely caught it. I turned back to the RV, heart hammering. The whisper came again. Faint, distorted. My voice. But the RV was empty. Wasn't it? Final thought before the horror begins. I took a deep, shaking breath and backed away from the RV. Maybe I was overtired. Maybe the isolation was messing with my mind. But as I stood there in the cold night, staring at the vehicle that was supposed to be my escape, I realized something chilling. I was no longer sure if the echoes were coming from inside the RV, or if something inside was listening to me. The unsettling morning. I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. The RV was silent. No humming of the fridge, no distant sounds of birds outside, just a thick, muffled quiet that made my ears ring. I sat up, rubbing my face, trying to shake off the unease from the night before. The echoes, the whispers. I had convinced myself they were just tricks of acoustics, maybe even exhaustion playing with my head. But something felt wrong. I got up, stretched, and muttered to myself, just another day. A few seconds later, my own voice responded. Just another day. The exact same tone, same inflection, but it didn't feel like an echo. It felt like a response. A chill crawled up my spine. I exhaled sharply and shook my head. No, not again. I grabbed my phone and pressed record. I cleared my throat. Testing 1, 2, 3. A few seconds passed. Nothing. I played it back. Just my voice. I sighed in relief, feeling silly. Maybe last night really was just my imagination. I went about my morning routine, trying to ignore the crawling sensation in my chest. Then, just as I was about to turn off the recording, a faint, distant whisper. Not mine. I dropped my phone. A pattern begins. I forced myself to believe it was an audio glitch. I had to. I left the RV, desperate for fresh air, and found myself parked in the same empty lot surrounded by silent woods. The sky was overcast, the air heavy with the smell of damp earth. I turned, staring at the RV. The echoes only happened inside. I thought about driving away, but where would I go? This was my home now. So I went back inside. I took a deep breath and sat at the small dining table, determined to eat breakfast and ignore the gnawing dread in my stomach. The fork scraped against my plate. A few seconds later, scrape. I dropped the fork. It wasn't an echo. I tested it again, clinking my spoon against the table. A few seconds later, clink. Identical. Perfectly timed. But softer, like something was mimicking me. I pushed my plate away, my appetite gone. Seeking rational explanations. I spent the afternoon researching. Sitting in the driver's seat, laptop open, I searched everything from acoustics to audio hallucinations. Could old RV's trap sound somehow? Could the insulation cause a weird delay? Maybe the metal interior was creating some kind of feedback loop. But nothing explained why it sounded like my voice was answering me. Every so often, I tested it again. I'd clear my throat. A few seconds later, a throat clearing. I'd hum a tune under my breath. A few seconds later, the same hum, but wrong. The more I tested it, the more I noticed slight variations. A word stretched out too long. A syllable clipped too short. A breath where there shouldn't be one. And then, I knocked on the wooden table 3 times. Knock, knock, knock. I held my breath. And then, instead of repeating the pattern, something knocked back. Denial versus reality. I shoved away from the table, heart hammering. I was imagining things. I had to be. I needed to get out. I grabbed my keys and stepped outside. The sky had darkened with heavy clouds, the air thick with the smell of impending rain. The world outside felt real, grounded, normal. I breathed deeply, letting the wind cool my skin. But even out here, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me to come back. I forced myself to go for a walk, clearing my head. I stayed outside for hours, sitting by a small fire I made at the edge of the parking lot, staring into the flames until the sun disappeared completely. Then, reluctantly, I returned to the RV. I paused at the door, hand hovering over the handle. Inside, it was pitch dark, and waiting. I took a breath, turned on the lights, and stepped in. The RV was silent. Still, I exhaled. Maybe the fresh air helped. Maybe it was all just stress. I locked the door, tossed my jacket onto the couch, and muttered under my breath, "I'm going insane." And then, in the darkness, I'm going insane. Not an echo, a whisper. From right behind me. The evidence. I ran. I didn't stop until I was outside again, my breath ragged, heart slamming against my ribs. The night was silent. No distant cars, no rustling leaves. Just the sound of my own breathing. I turned back to the RV. The lights inside glowed warm and normal. It looked the same as it always had. But something was different now. I grabbed my phone and, with trembling hands, opened the recording app again. I hit record and took a deep breath. If there's someone here, say something. Silence. I waited, eyes locked on the RV's dark windows. I played it back. My voice echoed through the speakers. If there's someone here, say something. Silence followed. Then, a faint chuckle. Not mine. And then, come back inside. No more denial. I backed away. The voice, it sounded like me but wrong. Stretched. Off. Hungry. I turned and bolted toward the woods, running blindly. I didn't stop until I was deep among the trees, my breath coming in gasps. I pulled out my phone again, replaying the recording over and over. That wasn't an echo. That was something else. And worse. It was learning. Final thought before the horror escalates. I stood there in the dark, listening to my own distorted voice whispering through my phone. Somewhere back in the RV, something was waiting. And the scariest part? It was getting better at sounding like me. The return to the RV. I stood in the darkness, gripping my phone so tightly my fingers ached. The whisper still echoed in my mind. Come back inside. It wasn't my voice. Or maybe it was. Just off. The woods around me were silent, save for my own rapid breathing. The RV sat in the distance, a warm glow coming from the inside. It looked normal, but I knew better now. Something was in there, and it wanted me back. I wasn't going to give it what it wanted. I had two choices: leave the RV behind and find help, or go back in and try to figure out what was happening. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But my laptop, my phone charger, my wallet, all of it was still inside. I had nowhere to go. I took a deep breath and forced my feet forward, my pulse pounding louder with every step. The door loomed in front of me. I hesitated. Then slowly, I turned the handle and stepped inside. The RV isn't the same anymore. The moment I closed the door, the air felt wrong. Heavy. Thick. Like the RV itself was breathing. I stood in the entryway, listening. Silence. The kind that presses in on your eardrums, makes them ring. Like the air was holding its breath, waiting for me to move. I took a step forward. My boots scuffed against the floor. A second later. Scuff. My own step mimicked perfectly. But the sound hadn't come from where I was standing. It came from behind me. I spun around, heart hammering. The door was shut. The space behind me was empty. I swallowed hard. "Hello!" I called out, my voice shaking. A few seconds passed. Then, "Hello!" The same pitch. The same tone. But closer. A lump formed in my throat. I forced myself to move, heading toward the small kitchen area. I reached for a glass of water, my hands trembling. The moment I set the glass down. Clink. The same exact sound followed. But this time, it wasn't delayed. It happened at the same time. I stared at the counter, my breath coming in short gasps. The realization struck me cold. It wasn't echoing me anymore. It was predicting me. Something else is speaking. I needed to get out. I needed to leave now. I grabbed my phone and made my way toward the door. Then a voice, my voice, whispered behind me. "You're going the wrong way." I froze. The words slithered into my ears like oil, thick and cold. Slowly, I turned my head. The RV was empty. But I felt it. I wasn't alone. I backed up toward the door, my fingers fumbling for the lock. But then, I heard breathing. Shallow. Ragged. Not my own. It was coming from the driver's seat. I whipped my head toward the front of the RV. The chair was facing away from me. But I could see movement. Something was sitting there. And it was breathing. I wanted to run, but my feet felt glued to the floor. Then slowly, so agonizingly slow, the chair began to turn. Creak. I squeezed my eyes shut. I didn't want to see. But curiosity, or terror, forced them back open. The chair finished turning. And in it sat. Me. A perfect copy, but not quite right. My stomach twisted into a knot so tight, I thought I would pass out. The thing in the chair, it looked just like me. Same hair. Same clothes. Same terrified expression. But its eyes, they weren't mine. They were just a little too dark, just a little too empty. It tilted its head, mirroring my fear. Then, it smiled. My breath hitched. The smile was too wide, the teeth just a little too sharp. Like it hadn't quite figured out how a human face was supposed to move. "You're going the wrong way." It said it again. But this time, I saw its lips move, perfectly synced with my own voice. I took a step back, shaking my head. No, this isn't real. The thing in the chair blinked. And then, it stood up. My heart stopped. It moved like a puppet on loose strings, as if it was testing out its limbs, as if it wasn't used to them. I bolted for the door, my hands clawing at the lock. Click. Unlocked. I yanked it open and stumbled outside, gasping for air. The cold wind hit me, grounding me back in reality. I turned back, expecting to see the thing standing in the doorway. But the RV was empty. No movement. No figure. Nothing. Had I imagined it? Was I losing my mind? I backed away, my body trembling uncontrollably. Then, from inside the RV, a soft chuckle. "See you soon. The nightmare isn't over." I ran. I didn't stop until I was deep in the woods, my breath ragged, my chest aching. I collapsed onto the ground, my mind racing. That thing, whatever it was, it had been trying to become me. But why? I sat there in the darkness, listening to the wind rustling through the trees, trying to convince myself I was safe. Then, from somewhere in the distance, a soft echo of my own breathing. And then, a footstep. Not mine. It had followed me. Running isn't enough. I didn't stop running. The dark forest swallowed me, branches clawing at my arms as I pushed forward blindly. The air was cold and damp, but my skin burned with panic. Behind me, the echoes followed. Soft, distant imitations of my own footsteps. A whisper of my own ragged breathing. No matter how fast I ran, it kept pace. I wasn't just hearing myself from the RV anymore. It had followed me. Or maybe I had brought it with me. Something speaks without my voice. I stopped, pressing my back against a tree, trying to control my breathing. I had to think. I had to. A whisper, right next to my ear. "You're going the wrong way." I whirled around. Nothing. But the whisper hadn't been mine. All this time, the RV had been mimicking my voice. My words. My movements. But this was something else. I backed away, my heart slamming against my ribs. Then, a second whisper. "You can't run from yourself." It wasn't just copying me anymore. It was speaking on its own. The RV's voice has changed. I turned in every direction, searching the darkness. The wind whistled through the trees, masking every other sound. Then, a rustling behind me. I spun around, breath catching in my throat. There, between the trees, just barely visible in the pale moonlight. A figure. It stood completely still, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. I couldn't make out its face, but I knew. It was me. Not a reflection. Not an echo. It was standing there, watching, waiting. I took a shaky step back. My pulse pounded in my ears. The figure stepped forward, mirroring me. But its movements were wrong, a fraction of a second ahead of mine. It wasn't copying me anymore. It was leading, and I was following, confronting the echo. I had two choices: run and let it hunt me forever, or face it. I forced myself to stand my ground. My voice came out in a whisper. "What do you want?" For a long, horrible moment, the figure just stared. Then it spoke. To finish the conversation. The words were slow, deliberate. I swallowed hard. What conversation? It stepped closer. The moonlight hit its face. And I saw myself. But it wasn't just me. The eyes were sunken. The skin was too smooth, too stretched, like a mask pulled too tight over bone. It was almost me. But something was wrong. Something was missing. The thing smiled, tilting its head further, and whispered, "You left me behind." The truth I didn't want to know. I shook my head. No, that's not. You left me inside. I stumbled backward. My brain was screaming, rejecting whatever this thing was saying. Then a memory hit me. The first time I had noticed the echo. The first time I had heard my voice repeating seconds later. Had that been the moment I left something behind? Had I split? A nauseating dizziness washed over me. I gritted my teeth. No, this was just a trick. It wanted me to believe something that wasn't real. I turned to run, and it lunged, becoming the echo. I didn't even have time to scream. Cold fingers wrapped around my throat, impossibly strong. I kicked, I clawed, but my hands passed through it like smoke. But I could feel it. It pushed into me, sinking, slipping, crawling into my skin. A sickening, gut-wrenching pull yanked at my chest. I gasped, and suddenly, I wasn't standing in the woods anymore. Trapped in the silence. I was back in the RV, but something was wrong. The air was thick, heavy, pressing against me. I turned my head, but my body didn't move. No, I was inside the RV, but I wasn't in control. Something else was driving. I watched, trapped, as my own hands gripped the wheel. My own lips curled into a satisfied smile. I tried to scream, but my voice didn't come out. Instead, I heard something else. From the walls, from the air itself. A whisper. My own voice. You left me behind. And then, as the RV rumbled forward, I realized the worst thing of all. I was the echo now. I am not the one driving. The road stretched endlessly ahead, bathed in the eerie glow of my RV's headlights. But my hands weren't on the wheel. Not anymore. I could see everything, the dashboard, the faded road signs whipping past, but I couldn't move. I wasn't the one driving. I wasn't the one breathing. My chest rose and fell. My fingers tapped rhythmically against the steering wheel. But it wasn't me. I was just watching. Somewhere, trapped behind the sound of my own thoughts, my voice still echoed. Let me out. But the thing wearing my skin only smiled in the mirror. And it kept driving. The world no longer hears me. I don't know how long I sat there, screaming inside my own head. Hours? Days? The sun rose. The sun set. Still, the RV kept moving. No matter where I looked, I could see my body moving without me. It ate. It drank. It stopped for gas, exchanging small talk with strangers as if nothing was wrong. I tried to push against it, to take back control, but I was like a shadow behind glass, banging against a wall that wouldn't break. Nobody could hear me. Nobody could see me. And yet, I could hear everything. Every breath. Every heartbeat. Every echo. The voices are still there. At first, I thought I was alone in the silence. Then I heard them. Soft at first. Faint. Like whispers caught in a breeze, brushing against my mind. Then they grew stronger. Not just one voice. Hundreds. Thousands. Trapped. Layered on top of each other, like a chorus of lost souls speaking in loops, repeating words spoken long ago. Where am I? Let me out. What's happening? Is this real? I recognized some of them. My own voice from days ago. From minutes ago. Every word I had ever spoken in this RV was still here. And now, I was just another voice. Another sound swallowed by the endless echo. The RV keeps driving. It doesn't stop. The landscape changes, shifting from towering forests to empty highways. The body that was once mine hums along to the radio, as if everything is fine. But then sometimes, it stops humming, and it listens, as if it can still hear me. The passenger seat. I don't know how long it's been. Time slips away when you're not real anymore. But tonight, something changes. The RV slows to a crawl, pulling onto the shoulder of a deserted road. The headlights cut into the darkness. I feel something stir. A shift in the silence. Then, a shadow outside the passenger window. A figure. A man. He looks nervous, backpack slung over his shoulder, peering into the RV like he's unsure whether to approach. My hands, his hands, reach over and unlock the door. I try to scream. I try to warn him. But my voice is just another whisper in the endless sea of echoes. The door swings open. The man hesitates. Then slowly he steps inside. Another voice joins the chorus. The door shuts. The lock clicks. The RV rumbles back to life. The hitchhiker shifts awkwardly in the passenger seat, clearing his throat. So, thanks for stopping. His mouth smiles. Of course, it says, voice smooth, inviting. My voice. The hitchhiker settles in, glancing around. You drive this thing alone? My head nods. For now. I feel it. The moment it starts again. A tiny sound. Almost imperceptible. The hitchhiker's own words echoing back. Not immediate. Not exact. Just slightly off. A delay. A distortion. But he hears it. His brows furrow. What was that? The smile widens. What was what? I feel the panic bloom in the hitchhiker before he even understands why. He shifts in his seat. That sound. I thought I. Then it happens again. His own voice. I thought I. Repeating from the far end of the RV. The man stiffens. Looks over his shoulder. Darkness yawns behind him, endless and waiting. I try to scream. To warn him. To tell him run. But the only voice he hears is his own. coming from the back of the RV. Soft, distorted, wrong. I thought and that's when I know. He won't make it out. Because I didn't. Because no one ever does. Final thoughts. The RV keeps moving. A fresh voice joins the chorus. A new whisper is added to the echoes. And I wait, listening, forever. Next story. I always thought I was a safe driver. I never drank on the road, never texted while driving. I kept my hands at 10 and 2, checked my mirrors religiously, and always stopped when I felt too tired. But that was before the highway started driving me. It began on a stretch of empty road somewhere in the Midwest. One of those endless two-lane highways where the scenery never changes, and the horizon feels like an unreachable mirage. I had been on the road for hours, my RV humming steadily as I tried to keep my eyes focused. The digital clock on the dashboard read 1:47 a.m., but I swear I had checked it an hour ago, and it had said the same thing. I rubbed my eyes and yawned, my breath fogging slightly in the cool air. My hands felt heavy on the steering wheel, my fingers numb despite the heat blasting through the vents. Exhaustion wrapped around me like a weighted blanket. I should have pulled over at the last gas station, but there hadn't been one in miles, or at least, not one that I could remember. The radio crackled suddenly, pulling me out of my haze. The station had been playing some classic rock earlier, but now it was just static. I twisted the knob, searching for a signal. Wake up! I froze. It was faint, hidden beneath the static, but it was there. A whisper. A voice. Someone speaking. Hello! My own voice felt rough, dry. I swallowed and turned the volume up. Nothing. Just the hum of the tires rolling over the pavement, the steady thrumming of the engine. I exhaled sharply, forcing out a laugh. Highway hypnosis. That's all this was. I had been driving for too long, and my brain was starting to fill in the gaps. I needed to find a rest stop, pull over, and sleep. I checked my GPS. The screen flickered for a second, then recalibrated. No stops for another 47 miles. I sighed, gripping the wheel tighter. Just stay awake. 47 miles. I could make it. The air felt heavier now, pressing against my chest. I turned the heat down, then off entirely. My eyelids drooped. My fingers loosened on the wheel. I blinked. Just for a second. And when I opened my eyes, I wasn't on the same road anymore. I sucked in a breath so fast it hurt my chest. The highway in front of me was different. Before I blinked, it had been a straight, two-lane road with dry grass stretching endlessly on either side. Now, I was somewhere else entirely. The pavement was darker, almost wet-looking, with a dull shine under my headlights. The trees lining the road were tall and thick, glistening like they had just been rained on, but the sky above was completely clear, no clouds, no sign of a storm. Worst of all, my odometer had changed. I had been keeping track of the miles. I knew I had around 47 to go before I'd reach the next rest stop, but the number staring back at me now, 312 miles. The RV had traveled over 300 miles in the time it took me to blink. I slammed the brakes. The tires skidded slightly before the vehicle lurched to a stop. My breath was coming too fast, my heartbeat slamming against my ribs. This wasn't possible. I forced myself to think rationally. Maybe I was misremembering. Maybe I had been on autopilot and hadn't noticed the miles slipping by. Maybe I had actually fallen asleep at the wheel. But if that were true, if I had really blacked out for over 300 miles, how was I still on the road? I should have crashed. I should have veered off, hit a ditch, or wrapped around a tree. I wiped my palms on my jeans, slick with sweat despite the cold. I needed to check my phone. If I had been out for hours, maybe someone had called me. Maybe I could GPS my location and figure out where the hell I was. I grabbed my phone from the center console. The screen lit up, the clock displaying 1:47 a.m. I nearly dropped it. I checked the dashboard clock. 1:47 a.m. I had driven over 300 miles, but no time had passed. I was breathing too hard now, my pulse thundering in my ears. No, this was a glitch. I turned my phone off and back on. Still 1:47 a.m. I scrolled through my recent calls, texts, anything to confirm I hadn't lost time. But my call log was empty. My texts were gone. It was like my phone had been reset, completely wiped clean. No messages, no emails, no missed calls, like nothing had existed before this moment. A sharp bang echoed from the roof of the RV. I sucked in a sharp breath, heart hammering against my ribs. Something had just hit the roof. Not a branch, not debris. It sounded deliberate. A single solid thud. And then even worse, A second one, like footsteps. Someone, something, was walking on top of the RV. I stayed perfectly still, gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled hands, my breath shallow. Listen. Just listen. For a moment, there was silence. Then slow, measured steps. Thump, 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 moving toward the driver's side. I turned my head just enough to glance at the side mirror. My stomach dropped. There was a shape on the roof. I couldn't see it clearly, just a faint, shifting shadow cast in the dim glow of the moonlight. But I saw movement. A figure crouched low, arms too long, fingers spread like they were clutching the edge of the RV. It wasn't a person. I knew that instantly. A person's shadow wouldn't shift like that, wouldn't ripple like it was made of something unstable. My breath hitched in my throat as the shadow moved lower, inching toward the driver's side window. I didn't wait. I slammed the gas pedal. The RV's tires screeched against the wet-looking pavement before launching forward. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel, my pulse roaring in my ears. I didn't look at the mirror again. I didn't want to see if the shadow was still there, if it had slipped down the side of the RV, clinging, waiting. I just drove, faster than I ever had before. And behind me, barely audible over the roar of the engine, came the faintest whisper. "Wake up!" I kept my foot on the gas, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The RV hurtled down the empty road, its headlights cutting through the suffocating darkness. The shadow on the roof was gone, or at least I thought it was. I didn't dare check the mirrors. I could still hear my breath coming fast and sharp, my pulse slamming in my ears. I needed a plan. Think. I forced myself to look at the dashboard. My fuel gauge hadn't moved, even though I had been driving at full speed for what felt like forever. And the odometer? 312 miles. The number hadn't changed. It hadn't gone up. It hadn't gone down. I had been speeding for minutes, maybe longer, but the distance stayed the same, as if I wasn't really moving at all. A sickening realization crawled through my gut. Was I trapped? I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe slower. I couldn't keep going blindly like this. I needed to pull over. I needed to see where I was. With a shaky exhale, I eased my foot off the gas and let the RV slow down. The tires hummed against the pavement as I scanned for a safe place to stop. The road ahead stretched into blackness, lined with tall, unmoving trees. I didn't see any gas stations. No mile markers. No signs. Then suddenly, a dirt road appeared to my right. I didn't remember seeing it before. It wasn't marked, and it cut sharply into the trees, disappearing into the thick woods. But something about it felt right, like it was meant for me. I turned the wheel, guiding the RV onto the unpaved path. The tires crunched over gravel, the sound too loud in the eerie silence. As I drove deeper into the woods, the air seemed thicker, more stagnant, like I was pushing through something unnatural. Finally, I pulled to a stop. I cut the engine. For the first time since this nightmare started, I sat in complete silence. I waited, listening. The ticking of the cooling engine was the only sound at first. Then, tap, tap, tap. I stiffened. The sound was soft, barely audible. But it was there. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from behind me. Slowly, my breath shallow, I turned in my seat to face the RV's living area. And my stomach dropped. The clock on the wall was gone. In its place was something else, something drawn directly onto the wooden paneling. A circle, sloppy and uneven, like it had been made in a hurry. And inside that circle, 2 handprints. Small ones. Children's hands. My breath hitched. No, that wasn't there before. I knew that wall had been bare. I reached for my phone with trembling fingers, flipping on the flashlight. The beam cast a stark white glow over the wall, illuminating the dark smears that made up the handprints. Not paint, not marker, something darker, wetter. I didn't want to believe it, but the truth slithered into my mind before I could stop it. It was blood. My pulse roared in my ears as I stumbled back into the driver's seat, my heart hammering wildly against my ribs. I needed to leave. I needed to get the hell out of here right now. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered. I tried again. Nothing. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel. No, this wasn't happening. I flicked on the headlights, hoping the battery wasn't dead. The beams flooded the trees ahead, and revealed something standing just beyond the light's reach. A figure. Tall. Wrong. It wasn't moving. Just watching. I couldn't make out any details, only its shape. But then, it tilted its head. My breath caught in my throat. I had to go. Now, I slammed the key into the ignition, twisting it hard. The engine roared to life. I didn't hesitate. I threw the RV into reverse, tires skidding over the gravel as I backed out of the woods. The second I hit the main road, I twisted the wheel and gunned it. The headlights cut through the darkness, the trees blurring past me. I didn't look back. I didn't check if it was still there. I just drove. And then, I blinked. The road ahead shifted. The wet pavement was back. The dark, endless stretch of highway. And the odometer? 312 miles. Exactly where I had started. I let out a shaking breath. I hadn't escaped. I had never left. The odometer still read 312 miles. The road ahead was exactly the same, long, wet pavement stretching endlessly into the void. I had never left. A deep, icy dread seized my chest. I slammed the brakes, tires skidding against the asphalt. The RV lurched to a stop, my breathing ragged and uneven. My hands trembled against the wheel. This wasn't possible. I had just taken that dirt road. I had just seen that thing standing at the edge of the trees. But now, I swallowed hard, glancing at the dashboard. The fuel gauge hadn't moved. The time on the radio, 2:13 a.m., the same time as before. My mouth was dry. Had I imagined it? Had I really even moved at all? I reached for my phone, gripping it tight. My fingers shook as I pressed the button. The screen glowed. No signal. My thumb hovered over the home screen. The last opened app was my maps. I tapped it open, hoping, praying, it had tracked my route. A blue line should have shown where I had driven. A record of my movements. But the map was blank. Not a single trace of where I had been. No roads. No highways. Just a single, pulsing dot. Right in the middle of an empty void. I stared. The dot didn't move. I lifted my foot off the brake and let the RV roll forward a few inches. The dot didn't move. I swallowed hard. I wasn't being tracked. I wasn't on any road. According to the map, I didn't exist. A cold shiver rippled down my spine. Then, thud, something hit the roof. Hard. I jumped, my stomach twisting as the RV shook slightly. Another thud. Louder. Something moved up there. I could hear it. A slow, deliberate dragging sound. Like something was crawling across the roof. My breath came in short, uneven gasps. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to know. But I had to. I forced myself to reach for the rearview mirror. Tilted it, and froze. There was a shape. A shadowy figure crouched on the roof, its limbs too long. Its head at an unnatural angle, twisted like it had snapped its own neck. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel it watching me. A slow, eerie knock came from the ceiling. Knock, knock, knock. I couldn't move. Knock, knock, knock. The knocks matched my heartbeat. A pulse, a rhythm, like it knew, like it was waiting. Then, the radio clicked on. The speakers crackled, the static filling the RV. I swallowed, staring at the display. There was no station number, just a single word flashing. Listen. A voice whispered through the static. At first, it was garbled, a distorted, incomprehensible murmur. Then, a sound I recognized, my own voice. But it was wrong. Fuzzy, fainter, like an old, corrupted recording. Where am I? The voice asked. I shook my head. No, that wasn't real. But the voice continued. I don't remember sleeping. The words sent ice through my veins. Because I had said that. When I first woke up, the radio crackled again. And then, another voice. Not mine. You never woke up. A sharp, shuddering breath escaped my lips. The roof creaked. Something shifted. A new sound joined the static, a low, wet breathing. Right above me. I couldn't stay here. I had to run. With a guttural scream, I threw the RV into drive and slammed the gas. The tires screeched, the engine roared, and the RV lurched forward at full speed. I didn't care where I was going. I didn't care about anything except getting away. The shadow stayed on the roof. I could hear it crawling, clinging, staying with me. No matter how fast I drove, it was still there. Like it was part of me. Like it had always been waiting. Waiting for me to fall asleep again. I kept driving. Faster. Harder. The RV shook under the strain, tires gripping the wet asphalt as I pushed it beyond its limits. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care, as long as I could outrun it. But I already knew deep down I wouldn't. The shape still clung to the roof. The weight of it pressed down on the RV, like it was sinking into the metal. A parasite, a thing that had always been here. A part of me I had somehow forgotten. The radio crackled again. More words, more voices. They weren't mine anymore. They were other people. Faint, distant voices. Some pleading. Some sobbing. Some screaming. All of them lost. Trapped in whatever this place was. The realization hit me like ice water. I wasn't the first. I was just the latest. A fresh soul caught in this endless, waking nightmare. And just like the others, I was fading. The proof was on the odometer. Still stuck at 312 miles. No matter how far I drove, no matter how many turns I took, I was always back here, on the same stretch of road. I don't know how long I kept going. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. But eventually my eyes betrayed me. I could feel it happening. That creeping heaviness. That warm, sinking pull. Like my body wasn't mine anymore. Like something else was slipping in. I fought it. I bit my tongue until I tasted blood. I dug my nails into my arm, pain shooting up my wrist. But it wasn't enough. The sleep was stronger. It wanted me, needed me to give in. And when I did, when my eyelids finally fell, it happened instantly. I woke up still driving. The road stretched ahead, wet and endless. 312 miles. My hands were on the wheel. The same exact position. Like I had never moved. Never left. I licked my lips, dry as bone. My pulse hammered. Had I imagined it? Was it just a dream? Then I heard the radio. Soft static. Then a voice. Weak. Raspy. Hello? Can anyone hear me? I froze. Because I recognized it. That voice. I had heard it before. On another road. In another life. The voice of the driver before me. Begging for help. Calling out to anyone who could hear. And just like before, just like every single time before me, nobody answered. Because I already knew the truth. Nobody else was here. Only the road. Only the miles that didn't count. And the thing waiting on the roof. Waiting for me to sleep again. Waiting for the next driver. Next story. The road had been long, endless in a way that made time feel stretched thin, like a cassette tape left too long in the sun. Miles of empty highway flickered past in the RV's headlights, each stretch of pavement identical to the last, broken only by the occasional flickering road sign or the glow of distant truck stops. The map on my phone told me I was somewhere in the middle of nowhere, a back road cutting through the dense woodland, the kind of place where radio signals died and the stars felt too close. I was running on fumes, both my RV and my body. The dull ache behind my eyes throbbed in time with the low hum of the engine. I needed to stop. The last real rest I had was nearly 2 days ago, and I was beginning to feel it in the worst way. When I spotted the crooked wooden sign standing on the roadside, illuminated briefly by my high beams, I barely had time to process the words before they disappeared into the darkness. No one leaves after the third night. It sounded like some kind of joke, a remnant of an old tourist trap. My mind barely registered the meaning, too exhausted to care. A few yards past the sign, I spotted the entrance to the campsite, a gravel path leading into the woods, flanked by rusted metal poles where a gate might have once stood. There were no other road signs, no flashing neon to advertise a front office or registration booth. Just a dark, quiet place to pull over and sleep. Good enough. The RV rumbled as I turned onto the dirt path, my headlights sweeping over rows of vacant campsites. The place was old but functional. Wooden picnic tables, faded fire pits, overgrown patches of grass between the numbered slots. There was an eerie stillness, the kind of silence you only find deep in the woods, where the world feels untouched. I pulled into an empty spot near the tree-line, killed the engine, and let out a long breath. I was safe. For now. The first sign that something was off came as I stepped out of the RV. The air was thick, heavy in a way that pressed against my skin. The night was eerily quiet. No chirping crickets, no rustling leaves, just the distant hum of wind threading through the trees. Then I noticed the fire. A small campfire burned a few spaces over, the orange glow licking at the darkness. The flames were steady, controlled, but there was no one there. No chairs, no movement, just an abandoned fire flickering against the empty night. I hesitated, my hand still on the RV's door handle. Maybe someone had just stepped away. Maybe they had gone into their camper for a drink or a phone charger. The rational part of me clung to these explanations. I could imagine them returning any second now, offering an awkward wave, laughing off the strange coincidence. But no one did. The fire burned on untouched. I shivered, shaking off the unease, and locked the RV door behind me. If someone was out here, that was their business. I just needed sleep. Inside, the RV felt warmer than usual, almost stifling. I cracked a window, but the air outside was no better, dense and unmoving. With a sigh, I collapsed onto the bed, the exhaustion swallowing me whole. As my eyes fluttered shut, a strange thought slithered through my mind. No one leaves after the third night. I was too tired to care. The second sign came just before dawn. I woke up suddenly, the kind of jolt that makes your heart slam against your ribs. At first, I wasn't sure why. The RV was dark, the only light coming from the dim glow of the stove's clock, 3:12 a.m. Everything was still. Then I heard it. A whisper. Right outside the window. It was faint, so soft that I wasn't sure if I had imagined it. A hushed, almost curious sound, like someone murmuring just beneath their breath. My skin prickled. I didn't move. My eyes stayed fixed on the ceiling, ears straining in the silence. Seconds stretched long. I held my breath. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the whisper was gone. I swallowed hard and forced myself to sit up. Through the small window above my bed, I could see the empty fire pit where the flames had burned hours ago. The fire was dead, nothing but a pile of cold ash. I waited, listening. Nothing. With a slow breath, I lay back down, convincing myself that it had been my imagination. I was exhausted. My mind was playing tricks on me. And yet, as I drifted off again, I could have sworn I heard something moving in the trees. Morning came dull and gray, a thick mist curling low over the campsite. The place felt different in the daylight, less eerie, more abandoned. The office building was still there, a sagging wooden structure with peeling paint and a missing door. No one inside. No signs of life anywhere. I walked around the site, stretching my legs. The fire pit from last night was empty, untouched. No footprints. No chairs. No sign that anyone had been there at all. A chill crawled up my spine. I was being paranoid. It was just an old campsite, forgotten by time. Nothing sinister. Nothing strange. And yet, as I made my way back to the RV, my eyes landed on the entrance sign again. No one leaves after the third night. The words looked different now. The paint seemed fresher, the letters sharper. Almost as if someone had rewritten them overnight. A pit formed in my stomach. I had no intention of staying that long. One more night, maybe two, and I'd be back on the road. As I climbed into the RV, I told myself there was nothing to worry about. Just a weird old sign, a leftover relic from when this place was still in business. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was a warning. And I had already spent one night here. The first night at the campsite had been uneventful, almost disappointingly so. The fire crackled, the air smelled of pine and damp earth, and the only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. I had slept through the night without any disturbances, my mind still grappling with the strange sign at the entrance. No one leaves after the third night. It had to be a joke, one of those cryptic messages designed to give travelers a thrill. Maybe some local legend, a campfire tale to keep people entertained. I told myself that as I packed up my things the next morning, ready to continue my road trip. Except when I turned the key in the ignition, the RV wouldn't start. A sharp chill crept up my spine. This was an old vehicle, but I had taken care of it. I had checked the battery and engine before setting out on this trip. Everything had been fine. I tried again. The engine sputtered, groaned, then died. I took a deep breath, calming myself. Maybe it was something simple, wires loose, fuel issue. I popped the hood and stepped outside. The forest was quiet, unnaturally so. No birds, no wind, just a hollow silence pressing down on me. I swallowed hard and focused on the engine, checking the battery, the cables, the fuel line. Everything seemed fine, yet the RV refused to start. I was stranded. Maybe I could flag down another traveler, but the road leading to the campsite had been empty when I arrived. I hadn't seen another vehicle in hours. I decided to stay one more night. Maybe by morning, I could figure something out. The second night, that evening as I sat by the fire, something felt off. The air had changed. The shadows stretched unnaturally long against the dirt, bending like fingers reaching toward me. The silence was thicker, heavier. Then the sound came. At first, I thought it was the wind, but there was no breeze. It was a whisper, so faint I barely caught it. 2 nights left. I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs. I spun around, scanning the dark tree line. Nothing. Just the fire flickering, casting erratic shapes on the ground. I forced a laugh. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. The sign had unsettled me more than I thought. But then I saw them. Footprints in the dirt. Not mine. They led from the tree line to my RV, right up to the locked door. I hadn't heard anyone approach. Hadn't seen anyone. The fire snapped, sending a flurry of embers into the air, and I bolted for the RV, locking the door behind me. My breathing was shallow, hands clammy as I gripped the curtain and peeked outside. The campsite was empty, but I knew deep in my bones that I wasn't alone. The third day, morning came with a suffocating stillness. I barely slept, my mind racing with paranoia. The footprints outside were gone, as if the wind had swept them away overnight. I tried the RV again. It started. Relief flooded through me. I was getting out of here. I pressed the gas. The RV didn't move. I checked the brakes, the tires. Everything looked normal. But no matter how much I pressed the accelerator, the RV refused to budge. I felt trapped, as if the ground itself wouldn't let me go. A creeping realization took hold of me. No one leaves after the third night. I had one night left. And someone wanted me to stay. I sat in the driver's seat, my foot pressing the accelerator down, but the RV refused to move. The engine growled, rumbled, but the wheels didn't turn. It was as if some unseen force held the vehicle in place. I put it in reverse. No movement. Panic surged through me. I killed the engine, breathing heavily. My hands were clammy against the steering wheel. This didn't make sense. The road was solid dirt and gravel. There was nothing physically blocking the tires. But it was like the RV was locked in place by something I couldn't see. I needed to calm down. I grabbed my phone to check for a signal, but the screen only showed no service. No internet, no calls, no messages. I was completely cut off. I turned my attention back to the eerie silence surrounding the campsite. The usual morning noises, chirping birds, rustling leaves, the distant hum of wind, were absent. The world outside the RV felt frozen, waiting. And then I saw it, a single footprint, right outside my door. The strange part? It wasn't facing away from the RV. It was pointing toward it, like someone had been standing there, watching me. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe evenly. Maybe I left that footprint there last night and hadn't noticed. Maybe. No. I had checked outside that morning. The ground had been clear. The footprint was new. I locked the doors. The third night begins. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the weight of the situation pressed down on me. I was trapped here for another night. I spent the day trying everything I could think of, digging around the tires, pushing the RV manually, even gathering dry wood to use as leverage. Nothing worked. The vehicle refused to move, as if it had become part of the land itself. By evening, exhaustion took hold. I sat by the fire, my back to the RV, watching the last sliver of daylight fade behind the trees. The fire's glow cast flickering shadows across the dirt, stretching them long and unnatural. That's when the whisper came again. Low, barely audible, but unmistakable. One night left. I jerked upright, heart pounding. The voice had been right next to me, just over my shoulder. I spun around, but there was no one there. I stood, my breath coming in quick gasps, scanning the darkened forest. Shadows danced at the tree line, shifting in the firelight, but nothing moved. And then I saw them. Figures. Dozens of them, barely visible, standing just beyond the reach of the fire's glow. Their shapes were indistinct, wavering, but they were there. Watching. A cold sweat slicked my skin. I grabbed the flashlight and pointed it at the trees, but as soon as the beam hit the figures, they vanished. The forest was empty again. I was shaking. This wasn't my imagination. Something was here. I backed toward the RV, keeping the fire at my front. My fingers fumbled with the lock as I forced myself inside and slammed the door shut. That's when the knocking started. Soft at first. Just a faint tap 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 against the window beside the door. Then, another knock from the opposite side of the RV, tap tap tap. Then another. Tap tap tap. Soon, the sound came from all around me. Dozens of hands knocking, slow, deliberate, like they were waiting for me to react. I backed away from the windows, heart hammering, trying to convince myself this wasn't happening. And then my phone lit up. A notification. Unknown number, it's your last night. The screen flickered. Then the message vanished. I dropped the phone. My hands were shaking too hard to pick it up. The knocking stopped. Silence. For a long time, I didn't move. I barely breathed. I strained my ears, listening for any sign that something was still outside. Nothing. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to move. I inched toward the window, just enough to lift the corner of the curtain. Outside, the fire had burned down to glowing embers. And in the dim red light, I saw something scratched into the dirt just outside my door. A warning. A command. A promise. Don't open the door. Night had fallen heavily over the abandoned RV park, draping the campsite in an unnatural darkness that seemed thicker than it should have been. The moon, once bright, was now obscured by rolling clouds, and the faint glow of distant streetlights from the highway had disappeared entirely, as if the world beyond this cursed place no longer existed. Logan's breathing was uneven as he stood near the fire pit, gripping the rusted metal poker like a weapon. His girlfriend, Hannah, clutched his arm, her fingers ice-cold despite the fire crackling beside them. Across from them, Rick and Olivia sat stiffly in their camping chairs, their eyes darting to the surrounding trees where shifting shadows lurked just beyond the reach of the firelight. The sign, the one that read "No one leaves after the third night," was no longer at the entrance. Instead, it now stood just behind their RV, facing them, as if mocking their inability to escape. Logan wiped the sweat from his brow. "We're leaving. Now." Rick shook his head. "Dude, we've been through this. Every time we try, we end up back here." "That's because we keep trying to leave together," Hannah whispered, her voice trembling. What if we split up? We go in different directions?" Olivia let out a nervous laugh. "And end up alone? Hell no." A sudden, sharp thud came from the side of the RV. The group froze. Another thud, followed by the unmistakable sound of something dragging along the metal surface. It circled the RV slowly, scraping against it, the sound reminiscent of nails on a chalkboard. Goosebumps crawled up Logan's arms. Screw this. He sprinted for the driver's seat, his pulse hammering in his ears. The others were right behind him. The keys were still in the ignition, just as they had been every time they tried to leave. He twisted them hard. The engine rumbled to life. Relief surged through his chest, but it was short-lived. The dashboard clock blinked 12:01 a.m. The third night had ended, and something was coming. The escape attempt. With the headlights beaming forward, Logan floored the gas pedal. The RV lurched forward, tires kicking up gravel as they sped toward the park's exit. The wooden signposts zipped past, the towering pine trees forming a tunnel-like passage ahead. The gate was just up the hill. Then it happened again. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. The RV coasted forward a few more feet before slowing to a dead stop. The lights flickered, then went dark. "No, no, no!" Logan slammed his fists against the wheel. Rick tried the door handle. Locked. "Guys," Olivia whimpered. "Look outside." Fog had settled over the park, thick and dense. Beyond the windshield, the road ahead twisted unnaturally, looping back into the campsite. The wooden sign that should have been at the entrance was now ahead of them again, the words on it changing before their very eyes. "You had your chance." A deep, resonant thud echoed from the roof of the RV, like something heavy had dropped onto it. Then footsteps. Slow, deliberate. A child's laughter drifted through the air. Hannah clamped a hand over her mouth, stifling a scream. Olivia was already sobbing. Rick grabbed the emergency hatchet from beneath the passenger seat and braced himself. Logan's hands shook as he reached for the ignition again. He twisted the key desperately. Nothing. Just silence. Then a voice whispered right beside his ear. "You were supposed to stay." The overhead lights flickered back on for a split second, revealing something horrific in the reflection of the windshield. A figure, hunched and featureless, its head cocked at an unnatural angle, fingers splayed out like claws, sitting in the back of the RV. The lights cut out again. The RV shook violently. The final moments. "Run!" Logan bellowed, slamming his shoulder into the door. It flew open. The group tumbled, out onto the damp earth, scrambling toward the trees. Hannah tripped. Logan turned to help her, but she wasn't looking at him. She was staring past him, her mouth agape. He followed her gaze. The campsite was different. The RV park was no longer empty. Dozens of RVs lined the spaces, their windows glowing with dim, flickering lights. Shadows moved behind the glass, figures pacing back and forth inside, their silhouettes unnervingly still, as if waiting. And then, the doors of each RV swung open in unison. The figures stepped out. They weren't human. They weren't alive. They had been here all along, waiting for new arrivals. Logan grabbed Hannah's hand, dragging her to her feet. "Go!" The four of them bolted, dodging through the trees, their lungs burning with effort. The figures did not chase them, but their presence loomed like a living nightmare, their unseen eyes watching, waiting. Ahead, a break in the trees. The highway. If they could just make it. A pair of headlights blazed into view, a truck speeding toward them. Logan waved frantically, but as the vehicle drew closer, his stomach dropped. It was their RV, driving toward them, And inside, behind the wheel, was Logan himself, his own face, expressionless. Empty. The last thing he heard before everything went black was the sound of the RV's brakes screeching, and the sign whispering in the wind, "No one leaves after the third night." 5. The open-ended psychological horror conclusion. The morning of the fourth day arrived, but something was wrong. The air inside the RV felt thick, heavy with an unseen weight pressing down on every surface. My breathing was shallow, my heart hammering against my ribs as I tried to convince myself that last night had just been another bad dream. But then I looked at the door. The scratches were deeper. They weren't random anymore. They formed words. "You stayed too long." My hands shook as I reached for the lock, but something inside me screamed not to touch it. The campsite outside my window looked different. The trees were no longer just trees. They were twisted, elongated, as if reaching toward the RV with gnarled fingers. The morning sunlight that should have filtered through the leaves was weak, gray, like the sky was just an empty void pretending to be dawn. I grabbed my phone, desperate to check the time, but the screen was blank. No signal, no battery indicator, just nothing. I tried turning on the RV's engine, but all I got was silence. Not the clicking sound of a dead battery, not even the hum of the ignition trying to turn over. Just silence. That's when I heard the voices. At first, they were distant whispers, circling the RV like a faint wind. But then they grew louder, familiar. They were my own. They repeated my own words from the past 3 days. Every fear I had spoken aloud, every moment of doubt or dread, it all echoed back at me in a perfect, mocking symphony. We should just leave. What if we aren't alone out here? Something isn't right. But the worst part came next. A voice that wasn't mine. "Stay." It was deep, guttural, and right outside the window. I spun around, eyes locked on the permanently fogged up pane. The handprint was still there, but now there was something else. A shape, indistinct but undeniably human, stood just beyond the glass, staring in. The longer I looked, the more details formed. A hollowed-out face, eyes that were too wide, a mouth that didn't move but somehow whispered. I stumbled back, knocking over the table. The sound echoed in a way that wasn't natural, bouncing back a second later with a slight distortion, as if reality itself was unraveling. I ran to the door, ignoring the scratches, ignoring the warnings, and yanked it open. The world outside was wrong. The trees no longer stood in place. They swayed, not with the wind, but as if they were moving on their own, rearranging themselves. The road leading out of the campsite was gone, replaced by more towering trees and unnatural formations. My RV wasn't parked on gravel anymore. The ground beneath my feet was dark, damp soil littered with bones. Human bones. Panic surged through me, but before I could react, the air changed. The whispers ceased, replaced by complete, suffocating silence. Then, a single voice broke through the void, a voice that came from everywhere at once. "You belong here now." I turned back to the RV, desperate to get inside, to find some kind of anchor to reality. But the RV was different. Old. Rusted. The paint was peeling, the windows were cracked, and the entire vehicle looked like it had been abandoned for decades. And then I saw them. Figures. Standing just beyond the treeline. Dozens of them. Pale, motionless. Watching. Their faces were blurred, indistinct, yet I could feel their eyes burrowing into me. I took a step back, and the ground wasn't beneath me anymore. I was falling. The darkness swallowed me whole. I woke up gasping for air, my hands clutching the wheel of the RV. The sun was bright, too bright, like midday had arrived in an instant. My body ached as if I had been driving for hours, but I didn't remember starting the engine. My phone vibrated, the screen suddenly alive. A text message popped up from an unknown number. "Do not come back." I glanced at the odometer. 0 miles. The gas tank was full. I turned my head slowly, afraid of what I'd see in the rearview mirror. The campsite was gone. Just an empty stretch of highway behind me. And then I noticed it, the faint outline of a handprint on the inside of the windshield. I didn't stop driving for the next 6 hours. Next story. The highway stretched ahead of me like a ribbon of faded black ink, unraveling into the horizon under a sky smudged with gray clouds. It was the kind of road that felt forgotten. No billboards, no gas stations for miles, just endless asphalt flanked by skeletal trees and abandoned barns. The only sound was the rhythmic hum of my RV's tires against the cracked pavement and the occasional creak from the cabinets inside. I glanced at the dashboard clock. 2:13 a.m. I'd been driving longer than I should have, the caffeine from my last gas station coffee wearing off. The night outside felt unnervingly still, like the world had been placed under a heavy glass dome. No streetlights, no headlights from other cars, just me and the road. That's why I almost didn't believe it when I saw the figure standing at the edge of the highway. A hitchhiker. They were just barely visible in the weak glow of my high beams, standing motionless near the shoulder. A backpack slung over one shoulder, dark clothes that blended too well into the night. Something about them sent a quiet alarm through me. Maybe it was the way they weren't waving or holding out a thumb, like most hitchhikers would. They just stood there, staring straight ahead, as if they already knew I was going to stop. I shouldn't stop. That was my first thought, but I slowed down anyway. I wasn't the kind of person to leave someone stranded, especially not in a place like this. No gas stations, no houses, just miles of nothing. Even if they weren't dangerous, I couldn't shake the thought of them freezing out there or getting hit by some half-asleep trucker. The RV rolled to a stop a few feet ahead of them. I kept my hands on the wheel, my heartbeat steady but alert. The engine idled softly as I reached over, unlocking the passenger door with a faint click. For a few seconds, they didn't move. Then, without any urgency, they walked forward and climbed inside. They slid into the passenger seat without a word, pulling the door shut behind them. I flicked my eyes toward them briefly, messy hair, a hood pulled halfway up, a face I couldn't fully make out in the dim light. "Where you headed?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. The hitchhiker's response was delayed, like they had to think about it. "Anywhere." Their voice was flat, monotone. It didn't match the kind of voice I expected from someone stranded on an empty highway in the middle of the night. I forced a chuckle. "Well, I guess I can help with that. I'm on my way to..." I stopped. I had been about to say where I was going, but for some reason I hesitated. Something about giving this stranger any personal details made my skin prickle. "Just passing through," I finished instead. They nodded, resting their backpack on their lap. Their hands remained perfectly still on the fabric, fingers barely moving. I adjusted my grip on the wheel. "Long night, huh?" The hitchhiker turned their head slightly. "Yes." Silence. Most hitchhikers I'd picked up in the past were at least a little chatty, eager to talk about where they were coming from, where they were going. But this one didn't ask me anything, didn't return any questions, didn't seem concerned about me at all. I flicked the radio on, trying to break the silence. A wave of static filled the cabin before I flipped through the stations, settling on something low and calm. Some old folk song hummed through the speakers, soft guitar chords strumming under hushed vocals. The hitchhiker's head turned toward the radio. Then they spoke. "This song," they murmured. "It sounds familiar." I glanced at them again, uneasy. "Yeah." They didn't answer. We drove on for another 15 minutes, the road stretching endlessly ahead. The tension in my gut hadn't eased, but I told myself I was being paranoid. Just another late-night traveler. Just a little awkward. Then I looked at them again. Their hands were still resting on the backpack, unmoving. Their posture hadn't changed. They were sitting in the exact same position as when they'd gotten in. Not even a slight shift. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel. Maybe they were just tired. Maybe they had fallen asleep with their eyes open, or... The thought made my stomach twist. I coughed lightly, trying to break the tension. You need some water or something?" The hitchhiker blinked. "No." Another pause. "Thanks for stopping." The way they said it made my skin crawl. Like they weren't thanking me for kindness, but for something else. I swallowed, forcing a nod. "Yeah, no problem." And then, they were gone. 1 second, they were sitting in the passenger seat. The next, the seat was empty. The backpack, the hooded figure, gone. My breath caught in my throat. My fingers went ice cold against the wheel. I didn't hear the door open. Didn't feel the rush of cold air. My foot slammed the brake. The RV skidded to a stop, tires screeching against the pavement. I turned, heart pounding, scanning the dark highway. No one was there. No shadow running into the trees. No distant silhouette in the rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty. My breath came sharp and shallow. My mind scrambled for logic, anything that made sense. Had I imagined them? Had I been driving too long, hallucinating from exhaustion? I turned to the passenger seat again. That's when I saw it. The seatbelt, still buckled. My stomach twisted. There was no way I had imagined that. The hitchhiker had been real. They had sat right there, and now they were just gone. A chill swept through the RV, raising goosebumps along my arms. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers shaky, and checked the time. 3:07 a.m. I had no memory of the last 45 minutes. I sat in stunned silence for what felt like an eternity, the engine humming softly, headlights illuminating the empty road ahead. Then I whispered to myself, "What the hell?" A second later, my own voice echoed back to me. But it wasn't my voice. It was softer, hollow. "What the hell?" My stomach lurched. I whipped my head around, heart hammering. No one was there. The engine hummed. The night outside was silent. I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel, my knuckles turning white. Then, from somewhere inside the RV, just behind me, a faint whisper. "Thanks for stopping." The air inside the RV felt different. Thicker, as if something unseen had settled in the empty space beside me, curling into the vacant seat where the hitchhiker had been just moments ago. My hands were still locked on the steering wheel, my breathing uneven. The words I had just heard, "Thanks for stopping," still lingered in my ears. But I was alone. The radio hummed softly in the background, some old folk tune barely audible beneath the ringing in my head. Outside, the road stretched ahead in perfect darkness. There were no streetlights, no passing cars. The only sign of life was the dull red glow of my dashboard. I swallowed hard and flicked my eyes toward the rearview mirror. Nothing, just the dim outline of the RV's interior, the kitchen area bathed in faint blue shadows. No movement, no sign that anything had changed. And yet, the silence felt wrong. I reached out slowly and turned the radio off. For a second, nothing happened. Just the quiet hum of the engine, the distant sound of the wind against the windows. Then, thump, a single muffled noise. My pulse spiked. I twisted in my seat, scanning the RV behind me. The sound had come from somewhere inside. I stared into the dark hallway leading to the back of the RV, past the tiny kitchen, past the bathroom door, toward the bedroom. The curtains over the bed were drawn shut, casting everything beyond into shadow. I wasn't sure why, but I had the sinking feeling that if I moved them, something would be standing there. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. I'm losing it. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe my brain was still playing tricks on me from the shock of the hitchhiker disappearing. That's all it was. Just exhaustion. Just my nerves. I forced my gaze back to the road, gripping the wheel tighter. "Get a grip," I muttered. And then, "Get a grip." My voice echoed, but I hadn't said it that time. My stomach twisted into a cold knot. The voice had come from behind me, low and distorted, almost empty. I turned the wheel sharply and pulled over. The RV rumbled as it came to a stop on the side of the highway. The engine idled, casting weak beams of light over the road ahead. I killed the ignition, plunging everything into stillness. Then hesitantly I reached for my phone. 3:23 a.m. I had no memory of the last 16 minutes. Something is wrong with the RV. I turned on my flashlight, the bright white beam cutting through the darkness of the cabin. The small kitchen counter, the sink, the bathroom door, everything looked exactly the same as before. But it didn't feel the same. I hesitated before speaking, my voice barely above a whisper. "Hello?" Silence. The flashlight trembled slightly in my grip as I pointed it toward the passenger seat. The seatbelt was still buckled. That was proof, wasn't it? Proof that someone had been there. And yet, there was no proof that they had ever left. I swallowed. I need to check the back. The air felt heavier as I stood up from the driver's seat and took a cautious step toward the hallway. My socked feet made no noise against the floor. Another step, and another. My pulse roared in my ears as I reached the curtain dividing the bedroom from the rest of the RV. The fabric swayed slightly, even though there was no draft. I lifted a trembling hand and yanked the curtain open. The flashlight flickered slightly as I swept it across the small bedroom. The bed was unmade, my blanket tangled near the foot of the mattress. My backpack was still where I had left it. Nothing seemed out of place, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to turn back toward the front of the RV. "Just need sleep," I muttered under my breath. "Just need to get some rest." I shut the curtain again, sealing off the back of the RV. That's when I heard it. A soft hiss, like a whisper, right next to my ear. I whirled around, heart slamming against my ribs. But there was nothing. No one. Just the empty space where I had been standing moments before. The whispering voice. I stumbled back toward the driver's seat, trying to shake the growing sense of dread curling in my stomach. I needed to keep moving. Needed to get the hell away from this stretch of road. I turned the key in the ignition. The RV rumbled to life. The headlights flared back on, illuminating the empty highway. I let out a shaky breath and gripped the wheel with both hands. Then softly, click, The radio turned on by itself. Static. My breath hitched. My fingers hovered over the dial, about to switch it off. But then, the static shifted, and a voice came through. Faint. Hollow. A perfect replica of my own. Just need to get some rest. A cold sweat broke out across my back. My throat locked up. Then the radio clicked off. I sat frozen in the driver's seat, unable to move, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I wasn't alone. Something else was in here with me. Something that sounded like me. I forced myself to look toward the passenger seat again, half expecting to see the hitchhiker sitting there once more, smiling. But the seat was still empty. And yet, something felt different. Like I wasn't supposed to look at it for too long. Like if I really looked, I'd see something sitting there. Something that had never left. Trapped in a loop. I swallowed the lump in my throat and slammed my foot onto the gas. The RV lurched forward, tires skidding against the pavement as I forced myself to keep driving. I needed to get to a town. Somewhere with people. The road signs were unreadable in the dark, but I didn't care where I ended up, as long as it was far from here. I drove for miles. Then I saw it. A lone figure standing at the edge of the highway. A hitchhiker. My stomach plummeted. No, this wasn't possible. It was them. The same hooded figure. Standing in the exact same spot where I had picked them up before. I slammed the brakes, my breathing ragged. The hitchhiker didn't move. Didn't wave. Just stood there. Waiting. Like they knew I'd be back. The second echo. I shut my eyes tight, trying to slow my breathing. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Then, from the back of the RV, a whisper. Thanks for stopping. I turned my head slowly. The bedroom curtain was wide open, and in the darkness beyond, a faint silhouette, sitting on the edge of my bed, watching me. The voice came again, but this time, it wasn't a whisper. It was right next to my ear. Let's keep driving. My breath hitched. The figure at the edge of my bed didn't move, didn't speak, just sat there, barely visible in the darkness beyond the thin beam of my flashlight. I felt a cold, creeping dread coil around my spine as I stared at them, my grip tightening around the steering wheel. My body wanted to run, to bolt from the RV and never look back. But my mind screamed that there was nowhere to go. Slowly, carefully, I reached for my phone. My fingers trembled as I unlocked the screen and turned on the camera. The dim glow from the screen cast a faint reflection on the windshield. And when I looked at it, the figure wasn't there, but I could still feel them, watching. Sitting in the same spot where I should have been alone. I clenched my jaw, forcing my voice to stay steady. Who are you? Nothing. Not even a breath. The silence in the RV stretched so thick it pressed against my skull. I turned, aiming my flashlight directly at the bed. But it was empty. The sheets were undisturbed. No imprint. No sign that anyone had ever been there at all. Except, the bedroom curtain was still open. I knew I had shut it. I knew. The small, shaking breath I let out was the only sound in the RV. I turned back toward the road, trying to steady my hands. And then, from the darkness behind me, "Who are you?" My own voice, echoed back at me from the empty bedroom. I didn't think. I just threw the RV into drive and slammed my foot onto the gas. Nowhere to run. The tires screeched against the pavement as I sped forward, heart hammering against my ribs. The road stretched ahead like an endless black ribbon, swallowed by the night. I risked one glance in the rearview mirror. The bedroom was still empty, but I knew I wasn't alone. I felt it, like something had melted into the walls of the RV, slipping into the spaces between the air itself. My own voice whispering back at me. That wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a malfunctioning radio. It wasn't a dream. I gritted my teeth and forced my eyes back to the road. Focus, I muttered. Just keep driving. Find a gas station. Find people. The last road sign had been miles back, and that's when I noticed. The gas gauge hadn't moved. I blinked, gripping the wheel tighter. That wasn't right. I had been driving for what felt like an eternity, but the needle was still in the same place. The odometer, too. I stared at the numbers. They weren't changing. It was like the road was stretching itself out, looping over and over again, trapping me in a drive that would never end. Panic flared in my chest. I reached for my phone again, desperate for any kind of service. No signal. No Wi-Fi. Just the endless stretch of dark highway ahead. And then, click. The radio turned back on. My blood went cold. Static crackled through the speakers, shifting and warping into something else. A breath. Then, my own voice, speaking words I had never said. "You've been driving in circles. You'll never leave." Trapped in the RV. I slammed my fist against the radio, yanking the dial off completely. The static cut out, leaving me in suffocating silence. But that silence didn't last. Because now, the voice was inside the RV. It whispered from the walls, the cabinets, the floor beneath my feet. Familiar. Empty. An echo of me. I gritted my teeth, trying to shut it out. But the words twisted, mimicking my thoughts before I could even form them. "You're losing your mind." I swerved, the RV lurching dangerously as my vision blurred. My hands were slick with sweat, my breath coming too fast. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I forced my eyes back to the road, and my stomach dropped. A figure stood in the headlights. The same hitchhiker. The same spot. I slammed the brakes. The RV skidded to a stop just inches from them. But they didn't move. Didn't flinch. Just stood there, hood drawn low over their face. The world around me felt wrong, like I had looped back to the exact moment when I first picked them up. "Thanks for stopping." The voice wasn't coming from them. It was inside the RV. Behind me. Close. I turned, and saw myself, sitting in the passenger seat, looking right at me, smiling. "Let's keep driving." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My own face stared back at me from the passenger seat, a twisted, almost amused smile stretching across its lips. "Let's keep driving." The voice was mine, the exact same tone, but the way it spoke was wrong. Too smooth, too certain. My stomach twisted violently. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles turned white, but I didn't dare look away. The figure outside, the hitchhiker, was still standing motionless in the headlights. And now so was I. The version of me in the seat next to me hadn't blinked, hadn't shifted, hadn't done anything, except watch and smile. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sandpaper. My voice came out hoarse. "What are you?" The other me tilted its head slightly. "I'm you." My pulse thundered in my ears. "No." I barely recognized my own voice. A laugh, my laugh, echoed from its throat, bouncing off the walls of the RV. But I didn't laugh. It was just repeating me, twisting the words, warbling them. The air inside the RV grew thick, pressing against my skull like the weight of something wrong, like the walls were closing in. The hitchhiker outside was still there, still staring. And then, they took a step forward. My breath caught. I turned to look at them fully, just for a second, and when I turned back, the thing in the passenger seat was gone. But I wasn't alone. The RV lurched violently as something unseen shifted behind me. I didn't think. I slammed the gas. The loop closes. The RV roared forward, tearing down the empty highway. The hitchhiker disappeared in the rearview mirror, swallowed by the dark. But the feeling inside the RV didn't leave. It stayed. Thick. Tangible. A heavy presence just behind me, just out of reach. I gritted my teeth, focusing on the road, but my own voice still echoed in my ears. Soft. Wrong. You'll never leave. The radio wasn't even on. The static hummed from the vents. The dashboard. The air itself. Every sound was my voice, repeating back at me. I jammed my foot harder on the pedal, but the speedometer wasn't moving. It was broken, just like the gas gauge, just like the odometer. I felt it then, the pull, like something had grabbed hold of my chest and was yanking me backward, like the RV wasn't moving at all, like the road was pulling me in, backward. I glanced at the mirror again, and my stomach dropped, because I wasn't driving away. I was going in reverse, even though my foot was on the gas, even though the wheels were spinning forward. The road was pulling me back, straight toward the hitchhiker, straight toward where I had started, a full loop, and no matter how hard I pressed the gas, I couldn't escape. The passenger returns. A new noise rose from the depths of the RV, a low scraping sound, like something shifting inside the walls, moving through the vents, sliding toward me. My hands were shaking on the wheel. I didn't dare look behind me, but I felt it, something sitting in the passenger seat again. I didn't want to see it, but I had to. I turned my head, and there I was, again, sitting perfectly still, smiling that same knowing smile. But this time I saw it. The difference. The skin on its hands wasn't skin. It was thin, stretched, like an echo of something that had once been alive, like a reflection that had been copied too many times, distorted. And when it spoke, the mouth didn't move, but I still heard my voice. "We've done this before." A wave of sickness hit me, a sharp, curling nausea that didn't feel human. I clenched my jaw. What do you mean? The thing didn't blink, didn't breathe, but I still heard my voice. You always stop for the hitchhiker. I felt my fingers go numb on the wheel. The RV kept rolling backward. The hitchhiker in the headlights was closer now. I could almost see their face. But something in me screamed not to look. The thing in the passenger seat leaned closer, its hollow, human-shaped head tilting slightly. It always ends the same way.